Well, hello. I'm back, and I I found this today. So I was out looking today at different shops for nice little candles and items like that. So I was looking for a small tea light, and I came away with this thing. So anyway, but it's I like it. I mean, I wanted something red and a candle. Well, it is that. So anyway, and this will last a while. And I'm going to go again next Saturday and see what I find. I have a couple of others, more holiday candles, so I'm going to be switching them around and I'll find something else too and then put those in. And so, um, yeah, that's what I have so far and a few other little things, but I will put those in one at a time. So, anyway, I thought you would get a blast out of that photo. I thought, well, I know there's such a thing called high tea, only that was as high as I could get the teacup. Anyway, it's just my quirky humor. So I had to do that for the photo. Um, yeah, so that's what I did. Anyway, for today, so I have two videos I'll do today, and oh, I was thinking what I can do is just do sort of a like an applied approach. For example, talk about how we apply the Bible to our lives. And I mean, I know I did this kind of too along the way, but just maybe dive into that some more. That would be a good direction to take. And yeah, just kind of how we live it out more, that kind of thing. So I had several for today, but that was something I thought, okay, I can bring in some Bible sections, but talk about that more, how you apply it in everyday situations. And I mean, we run into these all the time. I do, and I have stories about all this, so I can always use that for videos. And oh, and I replied to all the comments. I always do that. So just go ahead. You can always go back to the old videos and check for the replies to the comments, because sometimes I put something there and I don't mention it in the video. But don't feel obligated to respond. It's just, so you see that I did reply, and that's it. So, yeah, just to mention that real quick. Now, for today, I thought what was also on my mind is, I mean, this has actually nothing to do with the video I'm going to do, but I was thinking another topic actually is, and I looked into this many times too, is the different revivalists that have had their ministries throughout church history, the ones we know about lately more like, of course, there were many famous ones in Europe and in the United States as well. So there were many, and there were some real great revivals going on at different points in history. And it's really interesting to read about this. I looked into these things more on YouTube videos, but I looked for books about it and I can't find very much right now, but I'll try it again. Then I might share some things about that too. That would be a good topic. One thing I noticed was that many times, either revivalists or the revival itself, like everything is great, and then later, um, people try to slander it, throw mud on it, or the person even. and find all kinds of faults and, oh, but this and then that. And, I mean, even, I don't know all the details, but many times what happens is somebody is right and they get used, and then later in life, maybe they slip off the horse in some way, and then that's all people will point to, and who knows, maybe they got back on the horse. We can only hope for the best, but that's another topic. And lately, with that revival they had here a few years ago, same thing happened. I mean, I watched all the footage I could of this event over in Kentucky, and everything looked absolutely great. I mean, it was the kind of place I would love to be in the middle of. And, wonderful, and then I was so surprised a few days later, all these famous ministries on YouTube and wherever started coming out, practically attacking and being against. And I mean, I know, like, I'm very picky. I mean, I can find things anywhere, I really can, because there are problems everywhere. I know I'm very scrutinizing of things. I'm not just accepting anything that comes down the pipe, and that happens all too often, that people do accept anything and everything that comes in the name of God. And, it isn't. I mean, right now we see a very large example of that going on right now. And they just accept all that, don't question anything there. But when it comes to the legitimate deal, they are so against, and it's mind-boggling. I mean, I looked into that and there was nothing at all, absolutely nothing wrong. And I talked about this in other videos, I know, but so, but they come out against everything and attack, and there wasn't anything wrong. So it's amazing how people will do this, and they'll be so against these things, and it's a true move of God, and they'll be against it. And anyway, another thing I found interesting was, when I read these cases many times of these revivalists and their experiences, like their conversions, and, right away I think of my own experience. And if you are new here, just go and watch the first videos in the channel and you'll see what I mean. But that's what my experience was. And I know it's real. See, nobody can argue that with me because I know. But if you haven't been through this, and you didn't look into it, you didn't seek anything, you wouldn't know. So that's why I put it there. But I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't looked into any of this when I, had my conversion experience. And then later, when I looked into these other cases of other people, and that's when I found out, oh, wow, it was the same thing. They went through the same thing, the same experience. And yeah, I know, like, that's what it is. And it's real, and it confirms things in so many ways. So anyway, that is true. And so it's just amazing when you've been there and then you read about other cases, and it's just like, wow. So it's a marvelous thing. That's all I can say. I don't have enough words for it, but yeah. And then, but people who haven't had this, they wouldn't really, know. It's like you have to have been there to know. But a lot of people then wonder, well, then why didn't they get this? Well, again, you have to seek. Like it says, you have to seek You have to believe it's possible, and you have to really surrender to God and His will. And then it will, all I can say is then it would happen. This is the thing, though. Most people, they don't believe it's possible. And just like it says in the Bible, I mean, it's impossible without faith to please God. And if you don't have faith in something He said is real, you don't believe it, how is it ever going to be possible? Like, how would He enable a person to experience this? Then, if they, first of all, they don't even believe that. So that's the obstacle, I think, for most people. And then they don't really seek, they don't really, really fully surrender. And every case I read, that's what they did. They fully surrendered to God. So it was like His will and not mine, and for my whole life. And most are not willing to do that. So that's the key. But yeah, and many times, they might read it, but they think other things. They don't really look into it, and they don't pursue this. And those are, I think, the three main reasons why that's the case with so many. But it's possible for anyone. They just have to do that. And then it should happen. But okay, so anyway, I got into this tangent somehow. But now, the actual, but that would be interesting, to read more and share some things from those cases on the videos. But yeah, so it all connects, that's the thing I try to emphasize a lot. But now, okay, now really I'm getting to the topic. So what hit me yesterday, I thought, oh yeah, I gotta do a video about this. And I have to talk about these things a lot now because there's so much deception about this. Oh my goodness. I mean, once you're on the internet and you're on YouTube and you read these comments and you see everything that's going on out there, it's every other comment sometimes that people fall into this. And it's amazing. It reveals how many people really have fallen into this way of thinking. Okay, so the topic is actually kind of in general holidays as a Christian, like what should we celebrate, what should we not celebrate, how should we celebrate these things, that kind of thing. So now, it's different in different parts of the world, so I can only talk about here, what people do here, because that's what I know about. So obviously, okay, well, yesterday is out. There's absolute no way a Christian should celebrate that day in any way. I mean, there's so many dark things about that day, and I could just make a whole video about that, but I don't want to spend the whole time on that. It should be obvious, Okay, then we have there are people who think, and this is part of the whole legalistic Hebrew roots kind of thing, that people should only celebrate the 7 biblical feasts, and that you must do them and that you should only do those. That's their thinking, okay? And of course, it's wrong, and I'll explain why. But before that, another problem is that they think, depending on how deeply they got into this, they might even think that these 7 feasts should be celebrated in the way they were celebrated in the Old Testament times, which is total hooey, because that's absolutely contrary to the Christian faith, and I'll talk about that. But then you have other holidays outside of those, and I'll get to that too. Now, for one thing, okay, like the 7 feasts, they are in the Bible, yes, and God put these 7 feasts in there. We have to remember everything points to Jesus. These 7 feasts are no exception, and I talked about that a lot. How he fulfilled these, well, the first 4 so far. So we have, there's the unleavened bread, there's the Passover and the first fruits. Those 3 are kind of lumped together, the kind of spring feasts, and number 4 would be Pentecost, which is also a spring feast. Of course, this was all fulfilled during Holy Week, and that's what it all symbolizes, and I did all the videos on that before, but and Pentecost was fulfilled on the day of Pentecost. Each one was fulfilled on its day. And so it's been fulfilled. And now, as Christians, as the church, we are looking back on the fulfillment. We're not looking forward to that. They didn't really know it would be fulfilled in the way Jesus did it, but anyway, that's what it was. So as Christians, we don't celebrate these things in the same way as Jewish people did before Christ. See, they would celebrate the Passover in a different way. You can read what they did in the Bible, but then they've added traditions to that. And today they even have traditions. I don't know if they had this back then too, but where they were looking forward to the arrival of the Messiah. And some tradition, I think they left an open chair. I've heard so many things about this, but that back then would have been okay. But today, as a Christian, you can't celebrate it that way, because he's been here. He's already arrived and he'll return, but we don't look forward to his first arrival because it's already been done. That's accomplished. So we couldn't celebrate it in that way because that would even be a denial of him. See, so we couldn't do that way. That's the thing. Now, as Christians, the Messiah has arrived and he'll be back, and we celebrate these holidays in that kind of a way. And that's what the church has done for the last 2,000 years. It's really not a shock. So, yeah, I mean, we have some people do a Last Supper meal, some, communion on that day. We have Palm Sunday. They didn't know that would happen, but there was the triumphal entry as Palm Sunday. Of course, Good Friday, you can have another communion commemoration day. They have a Holy Saturday because it's in between everything, so it's sort of that kind of a day as well. And then Sunday, of course, is the resurrection, so we celebrate the resurrection. And that is the fulfillment of those feasts I mentioned. He is the Passover. He was the first fruits in the resurrection. Unleavened bread was a week long, and it was about more or less repenting. And so all of this sort of thing has been done. And then some, so as Christians, we celebrate that Jesus rose from the dead. We celebrate that he conquered sin and death and the devil on the cross. So we commemorate that. That is how we celebrate these things. And as Christians who see the completed work, that's the only way to celebrate this. I mean, you can't go back in time, and that would be foolish at best. So anyway, we celebrate it in those ways of the finished work. So, because it's finished. And then Pentecost was finished on its day, the day the Holy Spirit descended on the church, and the church was born. And we celebrate that, and then there's Ascension Day before that, 10 days before that. I celebrate all these things. And that wasn't mentioned. Ascension Day wasn't mentioned, in the Old Testament. It was, not everything was revealed, some things, some details were left for later. So now we celebrate all these things and we know their meaning and their fulfillment in Jesus. So that's how that works. And then the final three fall feasts really relate to the end times and the return and a lot of the events of the end times. So, I mean, you can, if you want to, have a fall feast to just celebrate the fact that he will return and set up the millennial kingdom. But, you're not bound to anything because that's, again, going back under legalism. We're not under that. We celebrate Jesus every day. We rejoice in his victories every day. It's a everyday thing. There's no one day that it's bad to do this, of course. That would be foolish to think that, but then you get the people that are hung up on the Sabbath day. And, well, I mean, it's Sunday now, and they can't wrap their heads around the fact that it's Sunday now. And that's, if you read the Bible, the New Testament, when the early church met, it was the first day of the week. So whatever calendar, it wasn't the Sabbath, okay? It was Sunday or, Sunday. So it wasn't on the seventh day, it was on the first day. And that's it. And the New Testament says we're not obligated to keep any kind of Sabbath or feast day or day in general because we're not under the law. And that's the deception that these people keep falling under everywhere I look. It's amazing. But so anyway, I thought I'd better do a video about this again because the holidays are coming up. Then we have other days that are okay to celebrate. You just look historically and culturally and you see it's okay to celebrate this. I think of Thanksgiving, that day is coming up, and all you're doing is thanking God for your provisions, everything he gave you, whatever that is, and provisions, protections, blessings, salvation. Obviously, you can thank him every day, and then there's the history of that, the whole thing about religious freedom and, all this. It's always good to appreciate these things. So it's that there's nothing wrong with celebrating that. And in Canada, they have it on another day. You can celebrate thankfulness to God every day of the week, every day of the year. There's nothing wrong with that. And then you get the crowd. Well, then you get the crowd that has a hang up about Easter. And again, yeah, there are things you shouldn't do in Easter, like, the Easter bunnies and the Easter eggs really point to the, it's basically fertility goddess worship because it's a symbol of fertility. Eggs, obviously. Rabbits were very prolific, so they used these symbols for fertility, okay? And that, yeah, it's pagan, so obviously you should not get involved with that. But does that mean we don't celebrate that Jesus rose from the dead? Absolutely not. We do celebrate that. He has victory, he has resurrected, and we celebrate that on that Sunday. You can call it Resurrection Sunday, fine, but that's what he did, and that's what we should celebrate as Christians. That's the number one holiday. That's the ultimate victory right there. We should absolutely, definitely celebrate that. What's not to celebrate, right? So I don't understand these people that they don't want to do anything, They almost want to go back to being Jews and just celebrate in an old way in the Old Testament and renounce their Christian faith. That's pretty much what some of them are doing because that's what it leads to. That's where that road leads. I've heard it many times about these people. Anyway, then you get to Christmas and you get another mixed bag. Of course, we don't know the actual day Jesus was born, but according to more accurate records, it was, and my suspicion is it was at the Feast of Tabernacles. And that would make sense when you look at the story of everything. It was crowded, they couldn't find room in the inns, everybody was there, right, for the feast. That would make sense. And it would make sense, it's an 8-day feast, and on the 8th day, the babies were circumcised. So it kind of would coincide in a interesting way, because it wasn't just the birth of anyone, right? So and it matches the God with us theme with tabernacles, and he came down to earth and took on a body, and it's like a temple tabernacle. So it all ties together, and I talked about that before too. But it would make sense also for the time of year. There were shepherds out. It wasn't too cold, right? It wasn't too hot. It would make sense to have it then. My suspicion is that time, and historically they researched this, and it seems most likely that it was sometime in the fall, so that would all line up and make sense. But okay, but there's no actual documented date, right? So we can't say for sure it was this day or it was that day. And that's okay. Again, it's another thing. You can celebrate it on every day of the year. You can celebrate that God gave us Jesus and he was born here, right? And all those wonderful things. So there's no day that it's wrong to celebrate it. And that includes December 25th, okay? God made every day of the year, and there's no day to him that's unclean, so there are things that out there in the world that are unclean. Obviously, we shouldn't touch that, deal with that, participate in that, anything like that. Even though God made everything, that doesn't mean, oh yeah, just go and do whatever. No, of course not. The Bible says we're not supposed to absolutely not do certain things. We're supposed to abstain and refrain from many things. Of course, they're unclean and whatever, so we don't do those things. And that is true in this way too. So that's why I'm saying, like, I'll just explain what I do. I mean, I celebrate that Jesus was born, and I kind of do it that whole time of year. There isn't really one day. But, I don't get involved with all the hype, the commercialism, that hype, the other things that they have. That there are many decorations that really are traced back to pagan origins. For instance, the colors red and green also relate to fertility, and that's another thing that can be looked into, but that's what I found. And there are other cultures that really use those colors a lot for the same reason. So it's another one of those things. And you wonder, well, what would those colors have to do with the birth of Jesus? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely nothing. I mean, so there's no color, there's no decoration that, and they say that, a lot of these pine related decorations are traced back to all these pagan roots, So I'm not saying you can't have a pine tree. God made pine trees. So again, you have to look at things in a balanced perspective. There are pine trees growing outside right now. I mean, but when it comes to basically all the hype about this stuff, the presents, it's all materialism. It's Santa Claus. It's snowmen and all these other things. And what happens is children, that's all they think about is, oh, Christmas trees and presents and Santa Claus and, all, what am I getting, and it all becomes about materialism, and it totally eclipses the true meaning of Christmas, what it's supposed to be about, which is the birth of Jesus, the best gift of all ever. So that's why, I don't get involved in the other stuff. I avoid all that. And there are no children in the situation either, so it's kind of easy. But, I don't get involved with all that. But I put my nativity scene out. I do all that kind of stuff because it's a witness. Any opportunity for a witness, have at it, by all means. All lights are green, You can have a nativity set in June, it doesn't matter. But, I do those things. I definitely have nativity sets. I send Christmas cards with that scene on it and Bible verses and all these things. And I mean, I have cozy Christmas lights and candles and, I have a little winter village. It's just seasonal. I'm not worshiping the snow or any of that, but I put out fall leaves in fall. I'm not worshiping nature then either. God made all of creation and it's there to enjoy, and that doesn't mean you're worshiping anything of it, of course. So spring too, I love spring. That's my favorite season, and summer is lovely. And I mean, these things were made as blessings to be enjoyed, and we need to have a balanced perspective on what we're actually doing and what we're not doing. So anyway, there are ways to do this in a good, honorable way that's right, and not get involved in the pagan roots of these things. Because if you research any holiday, they're there. Now, a lot of these holidays, what happened is, this came up on, Constantine when he came in, and he made the calendar that they have today in the Catholic Church. And this calendar has so many days on this feast day and that feast day and the feast day of the saint so and so and such and such. And I mean, it's just endless. So it's just, what he did was he took the surrounding religions and their deities, the people, the false gods they worshipped, and he slapped a disguise label, a cover on it, and called it, the feast day of Saint such and such. And, and it was really one of these false gods. That's how all these days got put on there. That's why there's so many of them, too. And unfortunately, December 25th, it was the Roman holiday. And I think it used to be the 20th or the 21st, and they moved it over. And it stayed on the 25th. That's the day they called Saturnalia, and it's another pagan holiday. And they did all the same things, red and green and pine and presents. And that's where the traditions really come from. So he put it all in there because he put all this stuff on the calendar because he wanted, basically dominionism again, a united empire, and he was doing this back then. That's why he incorporated all these things in the calendar, all these holidays. St. Valentine's Day is another one. It comes from, I think it's these cupids, and it's like a goddess of love, Eros or something. That's what's hiding behind all these masks of a saint such and such day, right? So that's how we got all these days. So if you research the history of these things, and the decorations will be a great clue, you find out what are the roots, what's going on behind the scenes, where did this really come from, the origins, and, all the pagan origins of these things that are behind that mask of that day. So we have to question this. We can't just roll along and just gullibly bouncing along and assuming it's all wonderful. Um, so again, we have to just have a balanced perspective, a biblical approach, and research these things. And yeah, so that's the deal about that. Now, I mean, all the holidays I can think of talking about basically here. So now when it comes to celebrating extra things, like some people would say, oh, well, that day isn't one of the 7 feasts, or this day, like Thanksgiving or whatever day, it isn't one of those 7 days, so therefore it's forbidden, and this and that, and that kind of thing. Well, I'm going to show them right now that they're wrong, and it's not that you can only celebrate those 7 and nothing else. Okay. Let me just check this real quick here. Yeah, here. So this is in John chapter 10, and it's verse 22. Way down here. Let me make this bigger. These new gloves, the old ones would let me push this thing here without having to remove the whole glove, but I found a trick, so it's okay. All right, I'm going to move this candle a little, and then I'll put this right here. Okay, now stand back and watch this. Now, it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch, and then they asked him all this, So he went there for that. There's another one too where it says his brothers are asking him if he's going to that feast, and he first doesn't say yes, and then he does go. I forgot which one it was, but yes, he went and celebrated this feast, and it wasn't one of the 7 feasts. It was a different feast, another additional feast. And we see that it was in winter. It wasn't a spring feast, and it wasn't a fall feast. And it was called a Feast of Dedication, which is a different feast from the 7 biblical feasts, okay? And Jesus celebrated that. And what feast was this? This was actually Hanukkah, which is in December. Somewhere it falls somewhere in December. Sometimes it's closer to Christmas, and sometimes it's earlier in the month. But anyway, this was the rededication of their temple celebration, which was what became Hanukkah. And there's a little miracle that went along with that. So anyway, this was 200 years before Christ, something with the Greeks, what they did, and then they cleansed the temple. So they had rebuilt it, 400 years before that, but then they rededicated it during this time with what happened with the Greeks coming in, because that's in Daniel too, the Greeks coming in. So, okay. And then the Romans, right? And before that, you had the other two. So they had to rededicate the temple. And there was a miracle about the oil in the lamp would last beyond the time it would have naturally lasted. So there were things happening, So that's where that holiday comes from. And that's the Feast of Dedication, that Hanukkah. So that's what they would celebrate, and it makes sense because it was after that event. And then you also had there was this one too that came up later, and he celebrated this, okay? So you can't say it's wrong to celebrate an extra time holiday besides the 7 biblical feasts, okay? Another one was with Esther, there was that holiday put in when they were preserved from destruction. And there was a holiday then at that time of year, every year, that they instituted for the Jewish people. So it would make sense after the fact to celebrate something like that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. God didn't say, no, you can't do that. So, you know, so people have to look at these things like, well, something got updated. There's more progressive revelation. It's okay that something changed that way, and it's good if you're celebrating something in which you're honoring God for something. I mean, how could that possibly be wrong? Again, that's good to do every day of the year. And we also look at it in a sense that, is it relevant as Christians, right? Like there's those days we wouldn't really celebrate. It's done, that's great, but it's not something we would celebrate now. So we have to look at all these kinds of things. Like now there are more recent days that people celebrate as Christians. So, I mentioned some of them, but that is the right approach. I mean, it honestly is. And there's leeway. I mean, of course, there's grace. That's what it means. You're free. You can celebrate this or not celebrate it, and you're not under obligation. That's what it means when it says that in the New Testament. And I didn't get all those verses out, but I've been over all this. But anyway, so it's in Colossians and Romans, that I know. But okay. And I think it's Romans 14, but all right, so we're not obligated, where there's leeway, you don't have to celebrate Christmas at all, whatever, but definitely there are things you shouldn't do, and I mentioned some of that, but, there are things that I think would be good to do in a sense that would honor God, so it would be an opportunity for a witness, so I think that would be a good thing. And again, every day we're free to honor God and rejoice and celebrate and worship Him and celebrate what He did for us. So that's never wrong on any day of the year. Okay, so that is it about holidays. So yeah, this turned out to be a pretty long video after all. Okay, I'll be right back for the next video, which is a different topic. So I hope that cleared up something, and yeah, I will be right back for the next one.